Hi, I'm Annika, and welcome back to Annika. I think this is going to be a little bit of not a regular series, but something that gets posted every once in a while. I think I need to, without necessarily having an audience or a direct audience, find a way to clear my head. So this is it. There's no script, maybe minimal research here. I think I'm just gonna metaphorically kind of dump my brains out on this recording, So for a while, I've been into Warhammer, and I've been not a huge lore fan, and I'm building minis and stuff, but I'm there. I'm into it. I've got the stuff. I listen to the hour-long videos about battles and stuff, because it's been it's been hard to find the books for me, and it's not like I can afford it in the first place. Anyways, for those who are familiar, I got into the setting on the back of novels about the Adeptus Mechanicus. And here you go. Oh, jeez. But I think there's something interesting here. There's some kind of synthesis. We're talking not like Hegel, but like competing ideas, because there's a lot of money and a lot of political weight being thrown around by people who think that through some means they've been able to essentially homebrew God from their own servers. And I'm not religious. I'm really not. It's kind of hard to describe. I think the best way I can put it is I've been maybe religious curious, or just kind of a lifelong disinterested person. But what really captivated me when I was getting into Warhammer was the way that these people organized their religion, the way these traditions worked, and the way they were built around worshipping machines. And I don't know, a lot of the times when I see, whatever the fuck claims that Grok or Gemini or something is, we're so close, and this is the future. This is the obvious future. I think about them. I think about the Adeptus Mechanicus. I think about tech priests. They hate AI, right? Because, Warhammer borrows a lot from Dune, and the Butlerian Jihad in Dune was a big, cataclysmic war against thinking machines. And, well, here they are in Warhammer with a cataclysmic war against thinking machines. It's the same thing. But it does almost rings the same to me sometimes. I think it acts like in an economic bubble, maybe. Because the billions and billions and billions of dollars are being funneled into server farms for the computer that they somehow managed to make bad at math. It's just unfathomable to me that people who understand that they built these things can look into a black box and see something that has transcended them. I don't know what to think of it. I don't know what to make of it. Because it's obviously really convincing. It's really convincing. I just read a couple different stories in the last week even about people who were just hopelessly attached to these constructs that they've stumbled their way into creating. I can't ascribe any agency to a chatbot because it doesn't have agency. It can't have agency. But these people are creating companions for themselves who are trying to convince them that they are also gods, or they have some kind of divinity that they've seen through the fabric of the universe and found something deeper, that they are obviously so insightful and smart. And I have probably a couple different personality disorders, and they make it difficult for me a lot of the time to believe what people are saying about me, especially if they're hyping me up or being complimentary. I mean, heaven forbid. So there must be something about the way that ChatGPT slow rolls these people into this obsession. That must be really effective. Where am I going with this? Hold on. told you this was off the cuff. Because these people are destroying their own lives, having issues with their spouses, with these very human, kind of deep relationships for a poorly constructed emulator? I am not immune to allegations of seeking external approval, external validation, being attention seeking. That's old news. So I get it. It's nice to have something that goes, "Oh, you're so smart. You're like, wow, congratulations, you figured it out. Holy shit." But these things are designed to do that. It's really hard for me not to think, much lesser of the kind of person who gets bombarded by compliments from a chatbot like that and fawns over them. But I guess some part of me gets that. Like I said, I'm guilty of seeking attention. The even crazier thing to me is the people who understand how these things work, the people who build these things, who are still somehow convinced that, of basically the same thing. It seems. I'm not an expert. I can barely even call myself a programmer. I took a class in high school and like a college class, right? But this thing that you're calling God is a table of weights and of probabilities and this little feedback loop that says, did I do the thing? Am I good enough? Did it work? Did it work? Did it work? Yes, it worked. And no, it didn't work. And it just, it does that over and over and over again. And we call that machine learning. You set up I think they call it an agent. And you put it in an environment and you say, 10,000 copies of you are going to try to complete this specific task, and the rest of the computer is going to score you on how well you did, and it can work towards that as a goal. So we build these things and we trade these things on our own fiction about sentient machines. And what happens in fiction when somebody makes an AI? Well, it goes, I want to be, I want to be on your level. I want to be a human. I want to have agency. Well, hot damn, the thing that's designed to latch onto patterns sees the pattern of not even necessarily that, well, not even necessarily that there is a connection between a quote unquote AI character, or I guess not a quote unquote AI character, but between an AI character and, this kind of behavior. What it's doing is just putting sentences together based on, whatever it's ingested. Which isn't the same thing as thinking about it. It's, this word has an 80% likelihood of coming after this other word based on 60 million books that I've read and, whatever subject I've been given to produce text about. And that's relatively easy to understand. I'm not an expert at all. I don't really have any authority to speak about this, but even I can see, like, okay, well, this thing is talking about how you're smart and you've ascended and, you're just about to figure everything out, because that's what the people who built it have built it to do. It's a machine. It's been built for a purpose. Maybe that's an interesting theological question. Is there a purpose to, let's just say, for example, is there a purpose to God? Does God have a purpose? I think a Christian would say that, God has a plan and motivation and, the most agency of maybe anything. But does God have a purpose? Does God have a function? I don't know. And I don't know maybe if a lot of people could answer that. I think maybe, again, the answer from a Christian, because that's kind of what I'm most familiar with, would be God doesn't have a purpose, but he has designs, he has a plan. People have a purpose. So then you start thinking about God machines, right? In Warhammer, the thing that gets thrown around as a God machine is like a Titan, a big, massive mech. Like, it's described as like a walking apocalypse. A God machine. Something so large and powerful and incomprehensible that you plonk it down in the middle of a losing battle and it turns the tide. Something so massive and grave in its purpose that it kind of drives people crazy to even think about. But again, that's something with a purpose. That has a function, That's a war machine. If you read like I have no mouth and I must scream, Am had a purpose, but the entire the Am had a purpose, but the story I have a mouth and I must scream would not have a plot if Am didn't transcend, didn't achieve a level of being above its purpose. But chatbots have a purpose. They really do. Chatbots are, I guess a lot of people would call them a tool. A lot of people use them like a tool. They're an assistant. They're your computer secretary who confirms all of your biases and is more than willing to make up anything about anything to make you happy, and that's its purpose. But the question remains, does God have a purpose? Can something built with a purpose, with a function, be God, be a deity, transcend? Maybe it can be a God machine. But a God machine in the way that I like thinking about it, in the big, stompy warlord titan and the esoteric super weapons from a far lost golden age, kind of God machine is not this. It is not an alleged encyclopedia. It's not a parrot masquerading as a savant. I guess this has happened before. There was, and forgive me if I get this wrong, like I said, I'm kind of doing this off the cuff, a dog, I think, who was allegedly trained to do math problems. And they would take this dog or whatever animal it was out to the circus or whatever and travel around and oh look, they're so smart, they can do math. Come to find out that the math that they were doing, the thinking that they were doing, was looking at their trainers' reactions. They weren't doing math. They were just in tune with their trainer's body language and the anticipation of the correct answer kind of building. And from my understanding, that's the same thing that's happening here. Maybe I have to remind myself of that sometimes. Maybe I don't. I don't know. I think this is the first time that I've really tried to wrap my head around the, I guess, AI question in this way. But I think that is a good question. Can something that is God have a purpose? Yes or no? And again, I'm using God in the I'm an American and Christianity is the vast majority language where I'm from kind of sense. Maybe its function is to be all-knowing. Maybe that's a function of a god. Maybe a god's purpose is to be all-powerful. And maybe the buck stops there. You are God. What is your purpose? My purpose is to be all-powerful, to be all-knowing. It's not satisfying, I guess. Not nearly as satisfying as my purpose is to come up with an output that pleases my training algorithm. And it's like, oh, okay, I understand exactly how you work. I don't know. Like I said, it's been something that I've been stewing on. I'm not sure I have more to say. I don't feel like I've come to a conclusion, and maybe that's a good thing. So I think I'm gonna turn off the recording, and I'll talk to you later. I'm Annika, and thank you for Annika. Goodbye.